Didn't remember that. Kathy Sferra is our secretary. You probably remember her from her other roles in town government and other local organizations. Kelly Lawler, right there. She was our first treasurer when we reorganized, and then co-treasurer until about a month or two ago. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her, and hopefully she'll explain that later. Rob Gardner is now our treasurer. He and Kelly were co-treasurers for a few months. We assume Rob is descended from Henry Gardner, since they were both treasurers, but we may never know for sure. Our long-serving society members, Tom Zavorsky, you might recognize that name, and Liz Mosley of the Historic Styles Farm. Tom and Liz have been members forever, and they hold our institutional knowledge. That's our current board. Thank you, guys. And you'll all get to vote on whether or not to keep us later on. So, folks, we have a full agenda for you this afternoon, even though the slides are screwed up. But we'll get to the full agenda. But first, I wanted to say a few words about this month in history. It's an important anniversary year, as you know. 250 years ago, in 1775, big things were happening around here that changed the world forever. We are meeting here today exactly 6 months after April 19th. The 250th anniversary of that fateful day when 81 Stow men marched to Concord and then chased the British back to Charlestown and Boston. Many of those men continued on to fight other battles of the war. So after 6 months of war, how was it going by October? Well, quite some significant things happened that month, actually. In October 1775, King George III had dismissed the colonists' plea for reconciliation as an attempt to amuse him. We knew who knew there were pleas to reconcile with the king? I didn't. The colonists probably thought they were in a position to negotiate because by October, Massachusetts was under full control of the Patriot cause, with British forces trapped inside of Boston. By this time, the American forces, which of course included men from Stow, were now under the leadership of General George Washington, who had his headquarters in Cambridge. Washington fortified their positions around the city and worked to organize the militia into a more formal Continental Army that month. October 18th, a fleet of Royal Navy vessels attacked and burned almost the entire town of Falmouth, which is modern-day Portland, Maine. In retaliation from his headquarters in Cambridge, Washington ordered the first American naval expedition to interrupt British armaments, advancing the establishment of a Continental Navy and the commissioning of 2 ships on October 30th for the defense of the colonies. They harassed British supply lines and conducted raids throughout the harbor islands. As a result, British forces were facing shortages of food, fuel, and other supplies, and morale was low. Also by this time, the Massachusetts Provincial Congress had effectively seized power throughout the colony, operating as the de facto government outside of Boston. A major espionage event unfolded in October of 1775 when Patriot leader Dr. Benjamin Church was found to be spying for the British. Washington wrote to Congress about the incident, which led to a trial, Church's eventual imprisonment, and stricter laws against treason. But of course, the war was still in its infancy. It took almost 8 years of bloodshed to secure independence of the 13 American states, and men from Stow were there at battles throughout the states and throughout the war. That was October, 250 years ago. But a little more recently, like about a year ago, long-serving president of the society, Marilyn Zavorsky, handed over a bunch of important society stuff to Kelly Lawler. Marilyn's accomplishments were many. I was amazed at her research skills and the amount of information she could keep in her head. I was honored and felt very privileged to be a contributor to her research for her book. And I am humbled to be in this role, with no possible way of being able to do as much as she did for the preservation and dissemination of Stow's unique history. Sadly, she's no longer with us. Kelly has some more to say about Maryland and how the transition to this new executive board came about. Here's Kelly.
Thank you, Bruce. That was a lovely introduction to our new historical society. I wanted to say a few words about Maryland. I remember meeting Maryland when the Stow Historical Council was working on a virtual culture week. It was 2021, so it was right after COVID, and we weren't quite ready to have in-person events. So we created a culture fest that we were going to have online in the summertime, but we were going to have one final event where we got together at the Pompasitic Pine Bluffs Park is where we had it. So we did get together, we had a big event, we had music, dancers, it was really fun. But it started with an idea on the Stow Cultural Council where we wanted to have a trivia night virtually, and we worked with Stow TV, thank you, Jonathan, and we worked with Marilyn from the Stow Historical Council, the whole historical society. And we wanted to test everyone's knowledge of Stow. So we said, the title of this activity would be So You Think You Know Stow. And this event could not have happened without this collaboration with Marilyn. I was a new council member with Meredith Wood, who is still our chair for today. And I'm coming off of the Cultural Council in 2026, so just next year it'll be my 6 years on that committee. But we dug through newspaper articles that the Stow Historical Society, that Marilyn herself had contributed to writing, to storing on the website, to recording all of that information down. And we started to sift through what would be significant questions. So if you want to read through that, there is a quiz in the front. And you can also find the YouTube link if you want to watch an embarrassing video of myself. I do have one question for everybody that you can think about, because we did come up with the answer, but does anyone remember who the first president, the founding member of the Stow Historical Society was in 1961?
I'm going to guess it might have been Ellie Childs.
Good guess, but that's not what we found in the 1991 newsletter that Marilyn published in the Stow Historical Society. Liz, do you want to say it? Howard Gleason. So there you go. For 5 years, it said in that newsletter that he served as the president and founding member of the Stow Historical Society. So it was soon after that I had begun calling Marilyn more, asking her about this history that I had learned about. Butternut squash was really invented here, and asking her all of these questions. And she was more than willing to help anyone who needed access to resources. If you needed to give her, find out who she was crediting in the information, where she had received things, she remembered everything. And so it was soon after that she had told me of her cancer diagnosis and the treatments that she was receiving. I know there were long days that included Tom driving to the hospital and waiting for her, and it was really difficult. But she would tell me, you can call me tomorrow when I'm not in treatment. So, you know, her passion for this society was so deep, and we want to do something to remember her, and so I'll get to that in just a minute. Okay, so it was during this time that I found out about the hidden history at Stow Acres. Robert H. Hawkins was the first black entrepreneur to build, own, and operate a golf course in New England. History that dates back to 1926 and was originally called Mapledale Country Club. Marilyn would talk to me. She would share files, over 100 files that we had to share via email and Dropbox and USB ports, but we got all of the information together. She told us about how she went to the Middlesex County Registry of Deeds on multiple occasions. And she shared research, you know, from other local historians like Lou Halprin, who had done work, and Bob McDonald, who had submitted a final report and was on the Stow Historical Commission in 1986 when there was a survey of the land and the history at Stow Acres. So, as you can see, that history had its grasp on me, and I wanted to give that history to a wider audience. And so we formed a committee in 2022 called Rediscover Mapledale, and just this year we became our own official nonprofit. We had our first grant in 2023 from Freedom's Way National Heritage Area, and in 2024, we had our first tournament to memorialize Robert H. Hawkins. We are coming up on 100 years. So I was hoping, and it was in the summer of 2024 that I promised Marilyn that we would find people to keep the Historical Society going. And so I organized a meeting at Stow Acres in November of 2024, and we had a lot of people show up, a lot of people in this room, and we are trying to do the work. There's about 10 of us, right? And we're trying to do the work of one person. So we love Marilyn. We want to celebrate her legacy, and so I was hoping I was going to make a donation today, and hoping, if everybody agrees at our meeting today, that we could make a storytelling fund in the name of Marilyn Zavorsky. What do you say? All right, it's official. Thank you.
Well done. That was interesting. So I'm talking about our highlights from this year. It was really fun, actually, because the first thing we did is we all got together, got some buntings, a bunch of buntings, and came here and put them up. That was our first gathering together, and there were ladders and lights that didn't work, and we have recently noticed that the buntings may be turning slightly pink, if you look. I hope not, but they are. So that was our first thing. The next thing we got together to do, we went into, in early March, we attended a reception in Arlington at the old Schwam Mill, if anyone's ever been there. It was pretty interesting. There was an exhibit called The Road Where It Happened, Revolution Comes to Monotony. And it showed all the towns where Minutemen had left. And in fact, as we know, Stow had some that left. It was a really wonderful opportunity to connect with other towns whose militia companies also marched on that same day, 250 years ago. Then later, on April 19th, exactly 250 years after this battle of the Revolution, we gathered at Stow Town Hall and honored the Stow Minutemen's March to Concord. That was good too. We managed to get some Minutemen here all dressed up, and they had just finished the march, so they were pretty exhausted, but they came anyway. And we had a formal proclamation from the Select Board, which was read by Courtney Frecha, recognized the anniversary and reaffirming Stow's place on that historical day. It was a really wonderful commemoration and community celebration of our town for the revolutionary heritage. The next program was pretty interesting, very interesting to me, who'd lived here for a very long time. It was called Black Patriots of Stow and Boxborough. It was a joint program with the Boxborough Historical Society. Black Patriots of Stow and Boxborough. The program focused on the contributions of Black residents and patriots from our two towns that helped broaden and deepen our understanding of local history. Kelly, what were the two names?
Margaret Michelet and
The speakers. Yep. We had two wonderful speakers. And the residents, they lived on Taylor Road. Kate and Jess Chester. Yes, I couldn't remember that part. So the last thing we did so far this year, Gardner Inn signed dedication. We all gathered on the Lower Village Common, and we had the new installation put in. It was designed and donated by Ellen Sturgis and Mike Kopczynski. Several members of the Stow Minutemen Company joined us, along with a few other officials, and they helped mark this really important occasion, recognizing the thoughtful addition to our town's whole historic landscape. In closing, together with these four events, gathering at the Schwam Mill, April 19th commemoration, the Black Patriots program, and the Gardner Hill sign dedication, capture really what's best about our town, our history, ensuring every story from rediscovering what we never knew. It all has a place in our shared heritage. Very important. So I'd like to introduce Kathy Sfera to initiate our business meeting to see who's not coming back.
Thank you, Dorcas. I have the job as secretary to run the business meeting, which is a very complicated task. I did consider turning to the moderator for this job, but decided I could handle it. The bylaws require that the membership vote to accept the proposed slate of officers and directors for the Stow Historical Society. This is the slate of officers and board members that has been put forward to the membership. It looks a lot like the current slate. So my first job is to ask if there are any nominations from the floor. Anybody who want to replace any of us? Hearing none. Is there a motion to accept the slate? Is there a second? Thank you. So all those Stow Historical Society members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. And then I will turn to the treasurer, Rob Gardner, who's going to do the treasurer's report. I'll be back.
This will be fairly quick, but we started the year with I'm going to round off numbers, but $25,000 in our bank account, 2025. A chunk of that was money that was raised on behalf of Rediscover Mapledale, and then we endowed, once they got their organization set up, we endowed them with the money that we had raised. And I think that's right, I was just before I joined the board, but, oh, I'm sorry. So for the year, the activity, we had a little over $1,000 in donations, $2,500 in grants, primarily with respect to fund our 250th activities. Memberships of $580, which is net of some fees that are come out when we use credit cards to pay membership fees or any other thing. So total revenue of $4,154. Expenditures, the 250th event, Battle of Lexington, we spent $1,432. We have filing fees with the state, just ordinary reoccurring expenses of $245. The Rediscover Mapledale endowment was just over $13,000. Rent, which is primarily for using this hall here, of $200. And just some miscellaneous administrative fees of $63, which I think included buying checks and things like that. So total expenditures of $15,000, net cash flow of negative $10,851, and our current funds is $14,266. Any questions? Yes.
Yes, could you tell me if you're a 501c3?
Yes, we are.
Good.
Yep.
Because we have a small family foundation that can give the 501c3.
Well, that'd be terrific. Thank you very much. Thank you. All set. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And the question that he answered was, are we a 501c3? Yeah. So, yes. So he answered the question. I didn't know whether everybody heard the question. So it's my turn again. I'm here to tell everyone what we acquired this year. Somewhere in here. Here it is. And thank you all for voting us back in, I think. We got some work to do. Over the past year, the Society has acquired more donated items to our inventory. We already have an extensive inventory, but no permanent home, so we need to correct that. First thing that we acquired was a 1954 edition of the Pompous Syndicate, the Hale High School yearbook, donated by Alice Baskey Duggan, daughter of Grace Priest Baskey. Yep. And a softcover edition of When 13 Became One, donated by the author, Jack Head. Some of you probably remember Jack. A Stow native who grew up at Underwood's Corner, Whitman Street at Sudbury Road, son of Jack and Bobby Head. The book is available on Amazon. 3 postcards came to us depicting Stow, Mass, Boone Lake on the front and handwritten notes on the back from 1910. donated by Jane Kelly of Sunderland, Mass. And sorry about the blurry photos. That was my fault. Of course, it doesn't make much difference now with that projector, does it? Also in June, no, wait a minute. We have a June 1899 edition of the Genealogical Advertiser, which includes, among other random entries, Stow epitaphs continued, sent to us by the Littleton Historical Society, having been found in their collection. And in an uncanny coincidence, many of the epitaphs are from the Eveleth gravestones. The Reverend Eveleth having been Stow's first settled minister, who presumably lived in the house Dorcas grew up in, and whose descendants built the house she now lives in. That's quite a coincidence. We also acquired a cider press, most recently used by Petter Field at One Stack Farm to make cider for sale at the roadside at his house and barn on Packard Road at Great Road. The press having been found in the 1970s by Mr. Field and his neighbor, Peter Yasmentes, in one of their two barns, most likely the Valley View farm next door to Fields, which is now Woods Ryan's. That's according to Field's daughter, Faye. So that indicates that it was probably used on the property prior to those Yasmentes and the Fields owning those properties. The cider press was reportedly retired by Petter close to 2020, according to his daughter. See the photo? Not a real good photo. That photo was provided by Faye Field of Petter and his two cider presses. The one donated is the smaller of the two. I believe it's on our right, his left. The donation of the cider press came from Kirsten Haman, one of the new owners of the One Stack Farm. And after Ellen Sturgis and Mike Kopskinski put up the new Gardner Inn sign, they gave us the old one, so now that's in our possession. And lastly, an extensive collection of historical photographs of the Gleasondale Mill and the Gleason family members, all donated by Suzanne Fuller, a descendant of the Gleason family, as well as an 8x10 watercolor of Benjamin Whitney Gleason's birthplace. That's on an easel over there. I don't know where that house is. And an original framed 14-inch by 20-inch newspaper clipping from April 17th, 1914. It's an article titled Gleasondale, A History of a Hustling Village in Stow, Mass. I don't know what paper it's from. That generous donation of that framed newspaper clipping brings us to our next segment tonight. In keeping with our mission to present the past to the present, we'll take you back to the year 1914, 111 years ago, when those living in the area got to read about the history of Gleasondale up to that time. And I'm sure everyone read it. They weren't playing on their phones. Laura has chosen some excerpts from the article to read to us today. As she's reading it, imagine yourself walking home from a long, hard, noisy day in the mill, sitting down by the stove to take the chill off. It had just snowed the week before, and picking up the paper, and this is what you're reading. Take it away, Laura.
So as you will see, if you look back at that wonderful newspaper that's framed, it's got a lot of words. It is very fascinating, and I have attempted to take snippets of this article to give us a quick history without a lot of the interesting stories that are also in there, to let us know sort of what were we looking at 111 years ago in this article. So this article was written approximately 100 years after the first mill in the Gleasondale area from 1813. So this group of people were reflecting on the 100 years before and how much history had changed, and now we get to do the same thing. So I'm going to read some very difficult to read writing, and I apologize for any mispronunciations or squinting that I will do. All right, so here we go. What miracles the genii of the arts and sciences have wrought in the past 100 years. Although the world has been in existence thousands or millions of years previous to the erection of a cotton mill in this village in 1813, the art of cloth making was not much more advanced than it was in prehistoric times. The work of the mills of those days was the making of yarn to be used in the manufacture of cloths in the homes of weavers upon hand looms. The first certain records of the establishment of mills of any kind in that area of Stow, now called Gleasondale, is in a deed dated February 19th, 1770, by which John Gordon and his wife Mercy conveyed the sum £300, the land and the grist mill and a sawmill upon it to Timothy Gibson. On the 28th of March, 1776, Timothy Gibson sold the land, 60 acres, with the corn mill and sawmill for £462 to Abraham Randall, from whom the property received the name by which it was known for more than 50 years, Randall's Mills. These mills were located on the east side of the Assabet River. Abraham Randall was born in Stow, September 9th, 1741. He was a descendant of Stephen Randall, one of the original proprietors of the Pompasiticate plantation. He lived on and owned the farm that is now owned by Alfred D. Gleason. And as a private in Captain William Whitcomb's company, Colonel James Prescott's regiment, he responded to the alarm of April 19th, 1775, and later went on to have more history with the army that I'm not going to read to you about. On the death of Mr. Randall, we've skipped forward quite a few years, these mills became the property of his sons, Abraham and Paul, who conveyed them to Joel Cranston, Silas Felton, and Elijah Hale. On the 12th of November, 1812, Joel Cranston sold to Silas Jewell, an old resident, for the sum of $200, a half interest in about an acre of land on the west side of the Assabet River, retaining a half interest to himself with the agreement that they were to erect a cotton factory, which is now standing. Work upon the factory was at once begun, and the year 1813 marks the beginning of the industry whose product is now known in every textile market of the United States. January 8, 1814, Silas Jewell sold his interest in the factory to Silas Felton and Elijah Hale, who, with Joel Cranston, owned the Randall Mills, thus bringing all the mills under one management for the first time. So then we get a little history about selling things for a little bit. But we start discussing in the name of a rock bottom, which is what that area was called. So the matter of which the village received the name of Rock Bottom is not quite clear. It is related that when the laborers were digging for the foundation of the factory under the supervision of Mr. Cranston, they came to solid rock, and he said to them, "You've hit rock bottom." And this chance remark became first a byword and later the permanent name of that locality. In 1829 occurred one of the financial panics which periodically sweep the country. And among the many firms and corporations that became insolvent at the time was the firm of Cranston and Hale. On the 10th of March, 1830, Mr. LaForest purchased the property and then sold that the same day to Benjamin Poor, who at once took steps of increasing the capacity of the watermill and did a whole lot of stuff that I'm not going to read you about, but he really improved some things. January 14th, 1847, I promise I only have one more really long page to go. Okay, no, two more, sorry. At this point in time, the mortgage was defaulted on at one point in time, and at that point, Benjamin W. Gleason of Andover, Massachusetts, and Samuel Dale of Ware, Massachusetts, purchased the foreclosed upon mortgage. So that's where we are starting here with maybe hearing more of the Gleasondale area. So there's some interesting history of Benjamin Gleason about his early years working as a trade in the cabinet making and apprenticeship, which I'm going to skip on. But it was during that, but it did say that while he was working in Worcester, that was when he met George Dale, and that they were kindred spirits, apparently. and formed the partnership under the name Gleason and Davis. Shortly afterwards, they worked with Charles Ferber. Does anyone know anything about mills? No. Apparently, this is the start of Davis and Ferber, which is one of the largest manufacturer of woolen machinery in the world at the time this was written, which I found very interesting, right here. So about that time, then Gleason decided to go south because his health was failing, and that's what you do. Even back then, you go south, apparently. And he there met Ebenezer Dale, who introduced him to his brother, and the partnership with Samuel Dale and Mr. Gleason formed, and they began working in that area with the mill. So, how much more do you guys want to hear? Is this fascinating? I find it very fascinating. All right, fantastic. All right, so on February 14th, 1949, that's when Mr. Gleason formed that partnership with the brother of Ebenezer Dale, and they started working on the company and moving their time to make woolen flannels, which became famous throughout the textile trade. While Samuel Dell, his partner, acted as the bookkeeper, and Ebenezer Dale worked as the sales agent, Gleason worked on the woolen flannel part. So when Benjamin Gleason took possession of the plant, it consisted of a small wooden mill that was erected in 1813, and the brick mill that was built by Benjamin Poor in 1834. And that at that time, the new firm built a whole lot more with the brick mill, and then in 1850, they had a big expansion. And they removed the old machinery, added a whole bunch of new and improved stuff, and had a big new water wheel. So now, we are at May 9th, 1852. And the brick mill was burned to the ground. In addition to the loss incurred by the fire, the young company was defrauded of $15,000 by the insurers at that time. But far greater than the monetary consideration was the loss of Mr. Gleason of his friend and partner, Samuel J. Dale. While assisting in fighting the fire which destroyed the mill, Mr. Dale caught a severe cold, which developed into consumption and resulted in his death in Boston in March of 1853. So at that time, the share of his property reverted back to his brother Ebenezer Dale, who remained a silent partner with Gleason for a while. So in 1854, the present building, so present at the time, back then, of the building was about 125 feet and 4 stories high, and it was completed. They put in a whole lot of up-to-date machinery. And from this time onward, the history of Gleasondale is one of prosperity. The excellence of the product made possible by the textile knowledge of Mr. Gleason, combined with a high skill and the operation which he employed, finding a ready market. And after the death of their father in 1884, his 2 sons, Charles W. and Alfred D. Gleason, continued the business under the firm name of C&W. On August 1st, 1899, Charles W. Gleason, whose health had been very poor, retired from the business. He's selling out his interests to his brother, Alfred D. Gleason. And as the owner of the mill at the time, the time that this article was written, they say that he possesses the business genius of his father, who brought forth from the dead industry of rock-bottom life, giving to future generations the means of acquiring an honest livelihood. Tariffs are made and repealed, financial panics come and go, but the crack of the loom and the whir of the spindle is ever heard in the Gleason wooden mill. About 13 years ago, Alfred D. Gleason entered into partnership with J.P. Stevens and Mr. T. Stevens' son under the firm name of J.P. Stevens' Sons, Commissioners of New York City. So that's something to, where they were, a big, thriving mill at the time. And so now we start wrapping up here. So in retrospect, let us return to the view of the social condition of the good old days in our early history. A glance at the picture of the village as it was in 1825 will give you some idea of the difficulties under which our ancestors labored. Most of the transportation was done with oxen. The workers had to be ready to commence their day's work at 5:30 in the morning, working until 7:30 at night. The lights used for illuminating purpose were made from whale oil burned in a tin vessel with a rag drawn through an aperture at the top. When lit, producing dim and uncertain light, the wages paid an able-bodied man was $18 and 4 shillings a month. The company conducted the store in connection with the mill, and they settled with the employees once in 6 months, keeping 3 months' pay back. Right? So a little bit of sort of a sideways at the end here. It talks about how in 1848 the first schoolhouse was built in this village, and though through some oversight there was not enough seats to accommodate the pupils, and the nail and kegs and old boxes were had to use to supply this deficiency, so the kids were sitting on old boxes. But in 1853, in 1853, the manufacture of shoes was briefly introduced and flourished until 1875, when the large shop built by Brigham and Rice was destroyed by fire. And although several residents of the village apparently continued to use, to bring the leather to Marlborough, the shoe industry sort of went out at that point in time. But also, another area in which things had improved and changed, the facilities of transportation were greatly added to in 1872 when the Massachusetts Central Railroad was built through the village. On April 1st, 1898, the name of the village was changed from Rock Bottom to Gleasondale in honor of Benjamin W. Gleason and Samuel J. Dale. So that's how we get Gleasondale. The same year, the schoolhouse, built in 1848, was torn down, and the present modern building was erected and furnished with every requisite asset to the pupils to preserve their knowledge. In addition to the advantages offered by the local school, the town of Stow provides free transportation to schools of all the advanced grades, including the Hale High School, who Elijah Hale founded, which I cut that part out, figuring maybe we knew that. In the fall of 1901, the Concord, Maynard, and Hudson Street Railway was completed. So imagine at this time we have lots of transportation going on, lots of interesting things happen. So now we're going to wrap up. The last few thoughts from the author, looking back on this 100 years of history. 100 years of remarkable human achievement from a wooden building equipped with 2 breakers, 2 finishers, and 2 spinning frames of 72 spindles each, run by water power, furnished through the aperture 14 inches square, illuminated at night by tallow candles or whale oil, the only way of communicating with the outside world by horseback riding. Contrast the modern brick building of today with its complete equipment of 9 set of cards and 2,800 spindles operating by steam and water power, illuminated by electric lights, 36 trains stopping at our stations daily, electric cars passing every half hour, the telegraph and the telephone noting every pulse speed of the world's market, the operatives working 54 and 58 hours of work, enjoying comforts which the wealthiest men of the country could not buy when the wooden mill was built. So that is. And Kathy has taken a nice picture of the article, which I think we'll do what we can to make it legible and up on our webpage. There's a lot more information in it, and it's, I think, a very good read. So let's all think back. It's been 100 years now.
And I'm hopeful that Jonathan can actually take these slides and intersperse them. I'm getting the thumbs up so that we'll have actual good slides. All right, we are going to zip forward in time to 1975, which feels for some of us like it wasn't really that long ago. This year, the Conservation Commission and the Stow Conservation Trust celebrated the 50th anniversary of Marble Hill. And Cliff and Diane Smith's son, I think it's Dylan, has done a really excellent video about the history of Marble Hill, which I think Jonathan has up on Stow TV. So if you haven't had a chance to see that, it's really wonderful, and I'd recommend that you look at it. I have tried to pull together some additional information from some of the documents in the town's files, and just give you a little bit of tidbits about the history of Marble Hill. So if we go to, yuck. 1974 and 1975, the population of Stow at the time was about 4,500 people. The Historical Commission had just been created by town meeting. The first open space and recreation plan had just been written. The Delaney Flood Control Project was under construction at the time. And Stow Conservation Trust had not yet been founded. And glory be, the Conservation Commission didn't do any permitting. So all they had to do all day, every time they met, was to sit around and talk about what open space they wanted to protect. The general economic condition of the town was not good. We were in the middle of a recession and an economic slowdown, although there were still quite a few houses being built every year owing to the opening of 495. So back then you would see 50, 60, 70 building permits issuing a year for house construction in Stow. I was graduating from 8th grade and hadn't even heard of Stow. And notably, I found in the town reports that the dedication and opening of the $300,000 addition to the Randall Library had just occurred. $300,000. So you're all used to seeing this map of open space in Stow. At the time that the town was thinking about Marble Hill, the only protected land in Stow was Stowtown Forest, and it was actually much smaller than it is today. Discussions had just begun about protecting the Parker land at Pine Bluff, but other than that, there really wasn't any open space unless you count the commons and some little things like that. The first mention that I could find of the idea of protecting Marble Hill was in the Conservation Commission minutes of February 24th, 1970, where it says that Mr. Treffry, Doug Treffry, said that 100 acres were for sale off Harvard Road for $56,000. The access is by Reggie Nichols' home, and the land presumably includes much of Marble Hill and would be beautiful for a conservation area. It was felt that we should think seriously about this land, perhaps trying to get an option. Well, the commission went on to discuss it some more, and members Holland, Pocky, Treffry, Waldron, and Childs had gone out and reported going to see the property and recommended the plan to try to get the Marble Hill land for the town if possible. Mr. Treffry said that he might be able to find out something from Bud Peck, and that Marble Hill was the highest point in Stow at 457 feet, which I am famous for saying, from which you can see nothing. In April 1970, they revisited the topic, and they said Marble Hill turned out to be the property of Jack Lord, the acreage below it, which is said to be for sale, and the property of Bill Peck actually appears to have been purchased by Shepherd and Johnson, who had previously bought land on the other side of the hill from Mr. Tyson. And then in May, it came up again. Mr. Jack Lord said he owned about 55 acres on Marble Hill, that he had bought a right-of-way from Bud Peck, which is legally established, but no road has been built on it, and that he's not anxious to sell the property. But he received a telephone call from Washington a while back concerning the property, but there'd been no follow-up. So, Tom Shepherd and Leonard Johnson were way ahead of the town. Thank you, Nancy. And they had actually gone out and purchased 2 of the 3 parcels that would become Marble Hill in 1969 from Michael and Sally Tyson, and in 1970 from Eleanor and William Peck, to prevent them from being developed and to create another conservation area for the town. The 3rd parcel that is now part of Marble Hill was purchased directly from the Lord Trust by the town. This is probably not easy to see, but this is a map of how Marble Hill was constructed, and basically the large pink, it's blue on my map, the large pink parcel on the left is the land that Shepherd and Johnson assembled, and the smaller parcel with the right-of-way down on the bottom on the right was the Lord Trust land. This is what Marble Hill could have been from the appraisal that was done for the property. It was about 65 lots that could have been developed on the property. And then we found a town meeting flyer that was prepared by the Conservation Commission. It's much longer than this. This is just an excerpt from it. But it says, prepared for town meeting, May 6th and 7th, 1974. The price for the entire property was $210,000 for about 245 acres, which is less than a building lot today. And then the plan was for half of that to be reimbursed by the state. Town meeting took up the question of the purchase of Marble Hill on May 9th, 1974. There were 2 articles that were brought on motions by Richard Savage, voted unanimously to authorize the commission to acquire 185 acres from Tom Shepard and Leonard Johnson for $160,000, and then to purchase another 72 acres from the heirs of C.D. Fletcher, which was the Lord Trust, for $50,000. The votes are recorded as unanimous, but I am told, and there's some evidence in the documents, that a few people changed their votes at the last minute so as to make the vote unanimous, which I can't imagine happening today. At the 5th session of town meeting on Monday, May 20th, an attempt was made to reconsider Articles 11 and 12, but failed to muster the necessary 2/3 vote. I mentioned the reimbursement from the state, and this is the actual receipt from C. Warren Smith, treasurer, attesting to the receipt of the state reimbursement funds. And then, so at the end of the day, the town ended up paying $207,000 for 245 acres, less than $1,000 an acre. That was said at the time in the discussions at town meeting to be not unreasonable for this area, with half of it reimbursed by the state. The final closing happened on May 1975, which is why we're celebrating the anniversary this year rather than last year. And one of the really neat things that I found in the files was about 11 pages of the original handwritten presentation that was presumably done by Richard Savage. It doesn't have a name on it, but since he did the presentation, I'm assuming it was his presentation. And it goes on at great length about all the reasons why the town should purchase the property. And it concludes with this paragraph. The long-range benefits are really incalculable. Who is to say what 257 acres of forested open space will be worth to the people of Stow 50 years hence? The time for preserving such land is while it is still available. The time to act is tonight. A little prescient. So we are indeed indebted to Tom Shepard and Leonard Johnson and the townspeople from 1974 for their vote and for much more. Tom went on, as many of you know, to help found the Stow Conservation Trust and to advocate for the protection of many additional parcels in Stow. And Leonard Johnson has continued to be involved in land conservation on Cape Cod, where he was just awarded the Cape Land Trust's highest honor, called the Ansel Chaplin Land Conservation Award, earlier this year. So he's still alive and well and still at it. So that is all that I have. But I also have the honor of introducing Stephanie, who's our keynote speaker for today. Come on up, Stephanie. You're gonna have to hit the space bar. So Stephanie Lewis is the author of the Footprints in History column in the Independent of Stow and Bolton, and before that in the Stow and Bolton Independent, and was for a time the co-editor of the paper after Cindy Sari's retirement. Prior to her writing career, she was a high school English teacher for 24 years. Stephanie is a Bolton resident, but has learned so much about Stow and its history that it has become like a second home to her. So welcome, Stephanie, and we look forward to your presentation.
I don't claim any relation to the Lewises of Stow. Just to be clear, my Lewises come from Albany. I do, however, have a connection. Cedric Hapgood is my stepmother's umpteenth great-grandparent. So things you find out when you're doing research for your family and the town, and they coincide. So Today I'm going to talk to you about, if my phone will work so I can see the slides that are in front of you guys, sort of in front of you. I want to talk to you about how I do my research for the Stow newspaper, or the Stow history for the Stow and Bolton newspaper, and some of the tools that I have access to that historians in generations past did not have, and I'm extremely grateful for. So I will someday probably access all the paper ones that you guys have, you know, in various hiding places in town, but right now it's really easy to access things like newspapers. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So the essential tools that I use on a weekly basis are the newspapers from the local area. And we are blessed with a few different online access points for those. There are online groups that have access to the local newspapers from most of the towns and cities that are in the area. And then we have the Hudson Library has access to all of the old Hudson papers, which thankfully covered Stow and Bolton and other local towns. So the techniques that I use these days are avoiding Google as much as humanly possible and using what is available to me. The other types of things I use include my Ancestry.com access that I use for my family, but I use for all of the Stow residents that I look up. It's amazing what you can find on people. So the first one I use is newspapers.com. It's a paid subscription, and that gets me access to things like the Boston Globe and other national newspapers. I use newspaperarchives.com, and the Acton and Concord newspapers are all listed there. So the old Acton Assabet Valley Beacon, the Concord Enterprise, the various names of the Acton newspapers. There have been a lot of them over the years. The Stow papers are not available online, so those have not been digitized. So those I don't have access to on my computer at home, but all of the other local towns have those. And then the biggest one I use is the archives that are available from the Hudson Public Library, and that is a free available. So any of you have the ability to go to the Hudson Public Library's website and look up any newspaper from 1865 to 2020, I think, somewhere in there. 2021, to be exact. Here are just a few screenshots that you can't see, unfortunately, that are from some of the local papers that we have access to that have been digitized. So what's on the screen at the moment is the Concord Enterprise, the Fitchburg Sentinel, and the Hudson News, probably the Hudson News Enterprise to be exact. Hudson also had a number of newspapers over the years, the Hudson News, the Hudson Enterprise, the Hudson Daily Sun, Hudson Sun, and the Hudson Daily. I don't think they were all together one. And also the Boston Globe and the Worcester Telegram come from some of the other sources. How I go about using these tools. So I'm showing you what you can access straight from your house, which is the Hudson one. So the first one is what it would look like if you went to it and it was a clear picture. And it's the main screen. And then you can use the search bar, and you can put in the keywords that you want and the date that you're looking for it, and it'll come up with a bunch of results. If you're like me and you put in things like Stow, every word that has the word Stow in it shows up. Unfortunately, Stow is not an uncommon word in general. It's a verb, it's a noun, it's everything. And when you're lucky, you can find an article that actually is what you're looking for. So when I use the books that Childs and Crowell published, and those are my two main sources for where to start looking for my information, when I see something in those books, I can then go to the newspapers if it's within the time frame of 1865 to 2021. For the most part, the old history from 1900 and before is not as easily accessible, but certainly anything from 1900 forward is far more accessible to anyone these days. So the interesting part of today's talk is not the search, but some of the cool stories that I found about Stow. You guys have a really interesting history, I gotta say. For a small town, you have a lot of mayhem that has happened around here. Things I was not aware of. I grew up in Grafton, and we had nothing happen in our little town, but you guys know how to keep it lively. So the most interesting story that I've come across in all the years, the 2+ years that I've been doing this, is definitely known as the murder house. That, as I see you all nodding your head, because it's a story that you all know and I had to learn about. So none of this is institutional knowledge for me. And it was definitely an interesting story. And I got most of my start of information. There's a book about it. There's a book that includes it. There's a whole book called Murder and Mayhem, and this one happens to be of Middlesex County. There's one of Worcester County. And this story is definitely in there. And I was able to start with that. And then I was able to go to the newspapers of the day. So I was getting, the book would use newspapers to get its information. And so then I went to the source from the local newspapers. And it was definitely interesting. I think one of the more interesting aspects as a newspaper columnist is that different articles gave different information. So there was no consensus on a number of things. So if you read my 3-part article on it, it talked about how some information was not considered reliable, which was interesting because it was all written contemporaneously. So it depended on whether you were reading the Globe or the Telegram or the Fitchburg paper or the Lowell paper, which story you were getting. So I imagine you're all fairly familiar with the story, but we'll just do, especially for those of you that may be closer to my age who haven't heard the story over the years. The basic story goes that the murder house, which, of course, because I didn't write these things down on notes, is going to remind me, I believe it's the Gates house. Is it Gates? It's on Hudson Road. It's the blue house on Hudson Road that looks really antique. In fact, I probably, no, I don't have a picture of it. Did I have it on the previous slide? There we go. That house, the blue one up there. So that's the, I believe, the Gates house. And someone will correct me when I'm wrong. The house was owned at this point by William and Stacia it always gets me because there's Stenovich. I have it on here. I did. Okay. Stefanovich. There we go. I knew I had it written down. So the Stefanoviches were an older couple, no children. And they had a farmhand, Joe Stefanovsky. And one day, they just weren't around anymore. And no one really noticed because Joe, the farmhand, was taking care of all the business. He was taking care of everything that needed to be done, and he was selling the milk into town, and he was collecting all the funds that the various vendors were paying to the Stefanovich family for their various goods. And he said, oh, well, you know, William wasn't feeling well, and he went off to Chicago for stomach surgery. And I don't know if he'll be back. He wasn't well. And his wife, she's gone off to Eastern Massachusetts to go visit her family. So I don't know when she's coming back. But you can give me all the money that you owe the family, and I'll take care of it. It's not a problem. In fact, they sold me the property. And so I now own it, and now you owe me. But if someone came around to collect money, he's like, no, I'm just the farmhand. And so it started getting a little curious when he was both just the farmhand and the owner at the same time. And various neighbors kind of realized, hey, you know, we don't remember him not feeling well, and I would have thought that they would have told someone if they were going off to Chicago. So some family members started making questions and inquiries, and eventually the police got involved. And it didn't take long before they realized that William wasn't in Chicago, had never been to Chicago. They checked every hospital in Chicago, and they contacted Stacia's family, and they're like, she never came to see us. So one of the sisters came to the house. The bedroom was in tatters. The mattress was missing. They hadn't taken a trunk of clothing. All the clothes were still there, but there had definitely been a struggle. The police decide something is awry, and they want to question Joe Stefanovsky, and he's not around. He's disappeared. And so they go on a bit of a hunt for him. Now they're also hunting for William and Stacia. And it was a big property. Today, a lot of that property is now conservation land, in fact. But they went on a hunt. Now, in 2025, if someone goes missing and there's a crime scene, you don't let people in. In 1930s, they didn't seem to care. So most of the town came to search for William and Stacia and trampled over the entire property. Everywhere they walked, there was no saving of information. I'm not sure what they had for technology to have figured it out from anything in the property, but most of the town showed up on Hudson Road, and went searching for this couple. And eventually, there were some kids who were like, hey, this could be fun. We'll go searching. And a little adventure. And they took one of their friend's dogs. The friend with the dog didn't come, but the dog came. And they were off over in the woods, over by St. Michael's Cemetery in Hudson. And all of a sudden, the dog went crazy. Dog was barking, sticking. All of a sudden, the kids go over, and it was like a 1980s movie. They see a hand sticking up from the ground. And it turns out that whoever had buried William had done so after he had reached rigor and couldn't put him in the ground exactly where he should have been if you were going to keep him hidden. So the kids go running, find the police. The police all try. It's a quarter mile from the house. It's not exactly close. And so they go on this hunt for Joe now that there are two bodies that they've discovered in this. And he's eventually found to have multiple names, have quite a checkered past. He had a wife that he'd left 10 years earlier with a couple of kids, and she hadn't heard from him since. And he had a relationship with a woman in New Hampshire who was actually in jail. And he definitely was a bit of an interesting type. And they did catch up to him. They got a photo from a neighbor who had been picking blueberries with a group of friends in one of the neighboring properties and had run across Joe. And he had invited them back to the house, and they were taking pictures. And one of the girls had the picture. And so that went across the news wires. And so newspapers from the Boston Globe, you can see his picture in that. And he was at a hardware store in the Boston area. And the paper had just come out with his picture on it. And he walks in to this hardware store, and the clerk figured out, okay, this is the guy that's in the paper. I just read about it. This is a little concerning. And he went and he said to the guy, you're here for the thing you ordered the other day, right? And he's like, yeah, I ordered this. He's like, yeah, let me go check in the back and see if it's here. Luckily in the back, there's a telephone, and he used it to call the police, and police came and arrested him. And he gave this convoluted story about, no, he didn't kill them. William had attacked Stacia. And so in order to save her, he had killed William. And then somehow Stacia was killed anyway. So he didn't really figure that whole part out. He probably wasn't the brightest bulb. And so the determination by the police in their manner of figuring things out was that he had killed William over by where he was buried. And then it appeared that his story said that there had been screams in the process, and so Stacia had heard the screams a quarter mile away, not sure how that worked, and had come running, and he had hidden in the bush, and when she came to find her husband, he then killed her too, and then buried their bodies, poorly as it is, and ran away. Or didn't run away, he took over the farm, and then when he was found out, he ran away. So this story made all the newspapers because little town of Stow had a double murder and a felon on the run. So little town made a lot of news. So the best part of having access to all the newspapers is you can get stories like this. Most of my stories start from a newspaper, and they end up in a newspaper again, in the same way that the Gleasondale story is telling from 100 years earlier, and it's now 111 years old. These stories that were told in the newspaper 100 years ago are now going to be told 100 years later. And potentially, if all the newspapers are saved, these stories can be told by a historian in 2125 and be like, hey, they told these stories. On a side note, if you ever get a chance to read these Hudson newspapers, it's like 1900s Facebook. There are sections in the newspapers in the 1900s, 1920s, 1930s, when their communication was not posted on Facebook, what you're doing for your holiday, what you did for your vacation. It's in the newspaper. So if you've seen any of the old papers, it'll be like, Mrs. John Smith is visiting her family in Melrose this week. She will return on Tuesday. In the same way that I might post, had a great trip to New York City this weekend, and here's the pictures. It's the same thing, just the newspaper didn't include photos. That was the only difference. So you knew who was in the hospital, and you knew who was visiting their family, and you knew who was getting married, and who was going on a car trip to Mount Wachusett, because that was the exciting things to do in the day. Actually having a car was the exciting thing to do. And so if someone had a car and you could take that car to Princeton, so far away, to Mount Wachusett, something we now do for a couple hours, that was a day-long picnic for fun. So newspapers get to tell a lot of different stories. Future of newspapers. I'm gonna just plug the newspaper right now. So I'm assuming most of you, if not all of you, have a subscription to The Independent. If you don't, come see me later. I can give you a link to be able to sign up. The newspaper industry suffers from the fact that most of us have one of these in our hands, and advertising is a lot easier to do on the internet than it is to find a newspaper to put it into. It's a lot cheaper to put it on the internet than in a newspaper, because the internet doesn't cost as much as print newspaper. So it's really important for future historians to have access to things like a weekly or a daily newspaper. So while we have things like the Worcester Telegram and the Boston Globe, those do not cover major events unless you have, they don't cover daily events, only major events. So I know in recent years we've had major news stories that have come through again, rarely for good reasons. And so it's not the day-to-day information. No one's going to know what happened at the local select board meeting or the historic commission meeting or the conservation commission if we don't have local newspapers to cover that. I grew up in Grafton, and we had a newspaper, and it was great because you knew who was doing what, and you could keep tabs on each board and each, member of the select board, or, what was happening in town politics, so that there was nothing that could go awry. Everyone was aware of what was going on. When you lose that local news, we only lost it for a month here, and when we started back up in August, we had to have 20 pages just to fill all the things that had happened in July. And July is one of the dull months of the newspaper world. It's the summer, everyone's on vacation, no major meetings are taking place, and we still needed 20 pages to cover what had happened while we were not in print. So you can imagine what happens when a town doesn't have any newspaper. So I know Kristen John is working tirelessly. She is the editor, and she is working constantly to make sure that the people who get the newspaper have access to all of the information that comes from the various meetings in town, from contributions from local residents like you guys who know things that are going on, to talk about what's going on in the schools, what's going on with an Eagle Scout project, or what's going on with a construction project, as we all know is really important right around here at the moment. So I find out what's going on in Stow by reading the paper myself and then, contributing my own piece to it. So if anyone's interested and doesn't have a subscription, we have both print or print with digital. So the print with digital, we send you a digital copy. It comes to your phone, to your iPad, to your laptop, whatever, your big computer, desktop. So I think that's it. Are there questions on any of that? Yeah.
I have an ancestry account.
Yep.
I would try to find an obituary, find a paywall.
Yes.
It's newspapers.com paywall.
Yes, it is.
How do you go around those paywalls?
I pay for it. Unfortunately, the price of doing business includes, I pay for Ancestry, I pay for newspapers.com and newspaper archives, because otherwise, when I didn't pay for those things, I too hit the paywall, and eventually I was sick and tired of hitting the paywall, and actually it was a gift from my son for Christmas. I said, he's like, what do you want? And I'm like, I want a subscription for a year to this, and so it was nice. It's not overly expensive, but it is a cost. So if you're interested in finding those old obituaries, and not everyone has an obituary posted online, unfortunately, there's a lot of missing things that I go looking for and cannot find. But sometimes you get lucky, and sometimes Ancestry, someone will have taken a screenshot of it and put it on a picture, or sometimes it's on Find a Grave, another great option for finding information.
What do you think of AI?
So I come from a family that loves AI. I, being an old English teacher, not a huge fan. I use it to see if there's something that I'm not aware of, but then I always double check whatever references I can find, because AI is not perfect yet, and it does make things up. If it doesn't know it, it will invent it. And it will wholeheartedly invent it. As you may have heard on the news, there were lawyers that were using it to write their briefs for judges, and come to find out it was making up case law that didn't exist. So it's definitely, and I use AI to do things like plan a vacation, but I would not use it for solid information about what happened at the murder house. It can only take what's already available on the internet, and then if it can't find something, it sometimes just makes it up. And so you have to really be diligent in what you're doing, and what you want.
I just want to say, I love your articles.
Oh, thank you.
I love the detail that you put in there. Keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Stephanie,
But-
I sometimes read newspaper articles, not necessarily independent, even Rogers or whatever, but other papers, where I know the information is not accurate. And that people see the information in the newspaper and think because it's in print, it's accurate. So how far do you go for your research? The original document or somewhere else to substantiate that?
I do my best if that document is available. Sometimes I am stuck with whatever's there. I even find that our beloved historians, Mrs. Preston Crowell especially, was not diligent with her information. So I was called out on it once from someone that emailed Cindy to be like, hey, one of the dates that Stephanie used doesn't make sense. And they were right. It doesn't make sense. If I had done my own math, it wouldn't have made sense. Like someone was so-and-so old and they were born in this year, and mathematically the math doesn't math. So I do occasionally have to even question what I read in the history books in town. Some of it, I'm sure, all of it was intended to be as accurate as possible based on the records available at the time. In 1933, when the Crowells were writing, I don't know what access they had to old materials. I know Ellie Childs used a lot of Crowell's work in her book. In fact, it's verbatim in many sections, so it doesn't matter which book I take it from, it's coming from the same original source. I have to sometimes trust and verify, and sometimes I don't have the ability to verify. If I had full access to everything that they had used, perhaps, but I'm writing one column a week, and
So how would you suggest that someone else that's doing research do this?
so I found that there's the book on the history of Middlesex County, which is available. I've seen it at the Boston Public Library. That was fun to read. There are, the archives here in Stow, and sometimes it's just a matter of checking multiple sources. I just grabbed a couple of the other books because the library not available at the moment. I'm relying on what I already own at my house and not being able to get those at the current library location. And sometimes I can verify things on newspaper articles. Sometimes the newspaper articles are incorrect. I mean, we all know that we can read an article, and sometimes it's because it's before the information is fully known, and sometimes it's because those were written in the days of sort of yellow journalism, and things were sensationalized and were not necessarily, research first, print later. It was print first, be the first to print. And when you're trying to sell a newspaper, in the same way that TV works today or the internet works today, and someone scoops a story, if they're scooping it without verifying their information, it may 100 years later show up as information and it's not accurate. So yeah. You're welcome, Linda. Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you for having me today. Keep reading the paper.
So believe it or not, we're not far off schedule here. I get elected to do the closing remarks, because when I said, who's going to do the closing remarks, everybody said, you are. So,
Guy, say something again.
sure.
I'm Nancy Shepard. It was fun to see pictures of my husband Tom up there too. And I have one thing about that Tom that Leonard said about what they did with Marble Hill. But when I talked with Dot Spalding, she grew up in Gleasondale, and she was really sorry to miss the Gleasondale part of this, and it is going to be on something that.
We'll make the picture available for you all to look at.
Good.
Better when you can make it big on your computer.
Yeah, that's right. So she would love to have that. So have her in mind when you do. But she also had a wonderful personal feeling about growing up in Gleasondale and what that meant and how hard they all worked. And as some of you know, one of my interests is still finding the memories that people had from that. And I think when I'm doing that, Dot will have some things to add to memories of what Gleasondale it was like, because it just kind of. And then the other thing with Gleasondale, some of you know Emily Bayette, who was a Gleason, and she lived in Texas for a while, but now she lives in California to be near her daughter. But they love Gleasondale, and they love what she calls the Yalla House, their southern accent, and they come every year back to be there. And so I think that it's interesting to know about the Gleasons. And one other thing I wanted to say about when Tom and Leonard, and I think, Kathy, this was in when you gave the thing about Marble Hill that I went to at the senior center. And I loved the fact that Leonard, who was there, said someplace in the early 70s, there were pictures of when 495 was being built. And I'm sure that you knew this, but Tom and Leonard looked at that and they said, if 495 is being built, that's going to mean a lot of buildup around our area. And we want to do something to keep it from building up too much. And that was what got them going on by buying what was the Marble Hill land.
You just tried to save Harvard Acres.
Pardon?
You had just tried to save Harvard Acres.
Yeah, I guess so, and that didn't work, so, but they went ahead. And so, just looking, and they had the picture of 495, just things of dirt. And so we all need to have that kind of vision of what's here and what needs to be saved, and I think that's what this group is about doing.
Judy might have some.
There you go.
Dottie's mother was the postmistress in Gleasondale for years and years and years. So Dottie and I were in the same class. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that Bill Smith, who used to live on Whitney Road, used to meet in the library once a week with somebody else, and I don't remember who the other gentleman was. And they were looking into the history of Stow. So there may be a lot of records somewhere in the library basement. Or what?
From Bill Smith?
From Bill Smith.
I remember Bill.
I remember Bill too. Yes, lovely lady. Well, there are lots of other memories that I have, but they're for another time.
Thank you, Judy. And thanks for coming down from Groton. See what I wrote here for closing remarks. I don't remember. Oh, I wanted to give a shout out. To the Gloriosos for their generous monetary gift to the to the society. We do need funds to maintain our annual operations, so gifts and memberships are important to us financially. You can donate online on our website. There's membership application forms back there also for those of you who aren't members. If anybody wants to donate a building that we could use as a museum, that would be nice.
Here, here.
We need to work towards that end. We're also open to ideas for new programming and ideas for the newsletter. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach any one of the board members, or we can be reached at the email address historystow@gmail.com. Upcoming in 2026 is the nation's birthday, signing of the Declaration of Independence. And we plan to be partnering again. Is this still working? Okay. Partnering again with the Freedom's Way Natural Heritage Area for some events, including a community performance of Declaring Independence Then and Now in 2026. So stay tuned for that. As mentioned earlier by Kelly, next year is the 100th anniversary of the Mapledale Country Club, so check out their Rediscover Mapledale website and probably their social media accounts as well for their activities. I'd like to thank Bob Norton and all the other Hale High School students, Judy included, I'm sure, who contributed to the creation and the erection of that beautiful granite monument. Commemorating the location of the school. It was dedicated on June 14th this year. We had nothing to do with it, not a society event, so you guys deserve all the credit. Check it out. Next to the parking lot, corner of Crescent Street and Hartley Road. where the old Hales High School burned down on July 3rd, 1963. I have an alibi. And anybody else have anything they want to contribute? Because I think that's it, and it's not even 5 o'clock. Yes, sir.
I moved here from Honolulu. And you were talking about the confusion of all the Stows. And so I was telling my friend who was in Hawaii, I said, well, I'm living in Stow. And he said, you don't live in Stow, you live in Stow. Yeah. That's my contribution.
It's funny you should say that, because when I was a kid on a bicycle, some guy stopped and said, "Where's Stow?" I said, "Never heard of it." Well,
If anybody's interested, we have a small subcommittee that consists of Laura, Jim, and Susie Swirsky, who are trying to decipher pages and pages and pages of town meeting records from 1775 and 1776. So if anybody is a particular interest in taking a page or two and trying to turn them into English from the old wording that's in them, that would be great. Talk to Jim, Laura.
I forgot to say, if anyone has a story they want to have told in the footprints of history that has not yet been told, if you've got a story that you know from your ancestors or from your house or your childhood home or whatever the case may be, I'm all ears to grab more information. The few history books I've got only go so far. So before I start repeating myself on stories, I'd love to hear if you've got anything, or if you know your family has some great stories, or your neighbors that weren't here today. I'm all ears. You can email me right through the newspaper is fine, Stephanie@independentofstowandbolton.com. So it's in the newspaper, the rest of the email, but Stephanie at the beginning. You can get right to me. Okay.
anyone else? Time to eat the donuts if you haven't already. Thanks again.